Hi, I'm Piper Harris, a licensed professional counselor, and welcome to the Untangled Mind podcast. This is a show for people who want to understand why their mind works the way it does, not just how to cope with it. Drawing from neuropsychology, neurophilosophy, and data-driven CBT, we look at how anxiety and trauma shape perception, behavior, and choice, and what actually helps people change. I'm an integrative CBT therapist based in the Atlanta suburbs. Each episode is designed to teach you something concrete: how to recognize what's keeping you stuck, how to interrupt unhelpful patterns, and how to move forward with clarity and steadiness. Today we return to our trauma series. In episode 1, we covered the reality of trauma, the ACEs study, and the overall triphasic model, including safety, remembrance and mourning, and reconnection. Today we're going deeply into the very first phase, stage 1, equal safety. This is not a quick warm-up stage. It is essential foundation upon which everything else in recovery rests. If you are a survivor trying to feel safe in your own body and live life again, if you love someone who has experienced trauma, or if you're a clinician who wants to understand why the first stage of safety cannot be skipped, this episode is for you. This episode explores themes of trauma, loss of safety, the high cost of freedom, and the real challenges of establishing safety after prolonged harm. We will not use graphic details, but the material can still bring up strong emotions or memories. Please take care of yourself. Pause the episode, breathe, and ground yourself, or reach out for support whenever you need to. You are not alone. Let's begin. Hey, good morning, everyone. It's great to have you back. So we took a slight hiatus in between the series, and we're right back to the trauma series. So if you hadn't listened to part 1, it's where I'm introducing this trauma series, and we're predominantly looking through the triphasic model of trauma. Judith Herman, phenomenal therapist and researcher, and the triphasic model is really what I believe the gold standard for care of those that have survived trauma. Now, what I want to say, it was really interesting. My husband and I had some friends over. Our small group from church came over Friday night, and one of the gentlemen said to me, "Well, you know, Piper, tell me, what do you do?" And I said, "Well, predominantly the work I do at Untangled Mind is with trauma." And he just kind of looked at me. He's like, "Trauma? Like, what do you mean, trauma?" And unfortunately, and I talked about this with my husband, unfortunately, I think that the culture has taken words, psychological words, and misappropriated them, or just uses them as, bludgeoning instruments to stop conversations. And what I explained to this person is that, post-traumatic stress disorder or complex post-traumatic stress disorder. So, and he says, "Okay, well, what is that?" And I said, "Well, it's not just for combat veterans, but yes, I work with a lot of them. It's a lot of law enforcement. We're looking at a lot of healthcare workers. There's a lot of vicarious trauma in healthcare." Talked about single event trauma. So we're talking about car wrecks, earthquakes, floods. We saw a lot of this a few years ago with the flooding here in the South. And, then talked about, we're talking about childhood sexual abuse, domestic violence. We're talking about kidnappings. Cults are a big one. And so it's interesting to me because I think because the culture has taken this word trauma and applied it to everything, we forget when you do that, well, it's so traumatic to me. I get so tired of hearing these 20-somethings say this because they live an entitled life, number one, living in the United States. But you really are stealing away from the actual victims and survivors in the world. And so that's really frustrating to me. And then I get questions like this. And this guy, he's just a friend of our group. He wasn't being rude. He just was like, "Yeah, Piper, what kind of trauma?" So I understood that. So that's why I think that this series is so important to do, is one, to educate the public. Like, let's stop taking words and misapplying them. It's also for a nod toward those survivors. Like, if you want to find a truly good, actually truly trauma-informed therapist, and they love to just stamp themselves as trauma-informed, you need to listen to this series in the sense of If they don't know what the triphasic model of trauma therapy is, you probably need to find somebody else because they haven't deeply studied, nor have they certified. No, they probably don't even have a network of individuals to speak to about this. It is really, really key that you find an actual trauma-informed therapist. And then this is for the clinicians out there that slap that title on them, like, yeah, we're trauma-informed. And when the clients come to me in desperation, there was no trauma-informed anything going on. And so this really is education for those clinicians. I think you probably have the best intentions to help, but there's so much more to being a trauma therapist than one calling yourself a trauma therapist or these trauma coaches, which is very scary to me. There's much more to it. And so if you really truly believe in that human being and you want to help that human being that came to help, get your help, you need to listen to this and you need to educate yourself and make some changes. So we're really going to go into the triphasic model in this series. Today, we're going to talk about stage 1. Stage 1 is safety. And this is not really just the first step. It is the entire ground which all the other 2 stages are built on. So you cannot flit through stage 1 quickly. And Judith Herman is very, very clear about this. Without safety, we can't go into that genuine remembrance work. So going back and doing the trauma processing, or there will be no lasting reconnection. That's the third part of the triphasic model. So why is this true? Well, it's because trauma, especially prolonged trauma or interpersonal trauma, it really shatters the most basic sense of safety in the world for the individual. So that means like the nervous system, the brain is constantly staying in survival mode. So it's either hypervigilant, it can be extraordinarily shut down, or it can oscillate between the two. And the brain and the body literally believe, that danger is still very present. And so without safety, without this stage of safety, any attempts at processing that trauma can really overflood someone's nervous system and re-traumatize them rather than heal. And often the symptoms get worse. And so that trust in therapy absolutely erodes, and then the survivor can feel even more broken. I hear this all the time. I have a new client coming in and looking forward to working with a client, and was in therapy for 2 years, y'all, before me. And still having extraordinary traumatic symptoms. This is not just someone saying, well, I had a traumatic childhood. It is someone who is reliving it, actively reliving it, because their nervous system has not found that resolve. And it's because the trauma therapist, I'm using finger quotations, trauma therapist just did simple talk therapy. Now, listen, you can't do therapy without talking. So I wanted to establish the difference between plain old talk therapy and a trauma-informed therapy. So talk therapy, typically what we're hearing about now is that kind of passive model where it's the nodding, it's like, tell me more, or they kind of flit around within the client's story. And they might hand them a few tools every so often, but there's not really a process to it. And more often than not, they jump into the reprocessing much too quickly, or this is actually way more common. And I think probably for the case of the client that's coming on with me, is the therapist was highly, highly uncomfortable with the narrative. And so the therapist skipped it because the therapist couldn't handle listening to it. Which I understand. I do understand. I had the blessing of wonderful mentors in my life, and one of them is Dr. Melinda Page. I discussed her last podcast, and that was one of the first questions she asked me. Gosh, that was like 6 years ago. She said, Piper, you really have to think about this. If you really want to be just solely a trauma therapist, we need to have discussions about what can you sit with, what can't you sit with. And we really talked about that because, we talk about like healthcare workers and cops and, all of that. There's something called vicarious trauma. So when you're sitting and listening to stories and hearing stories or seeing stories, that can have a deep impact on my nervous system and others' nervous systems. So it can affect us in the same way. So you have to be very prepared as you go into this work. Even if you're not going to be a trauma therapist, just as a therapist in general, you really do have to be aware of what are some of those pitfalls? What are some of those things that I just really can't look at? When I mentor students, I have a mentoring program that I've developed. And one of the things that I actually have them do is it's like a checklist of these are the things that I can sit with. These are the things I can't sit with. And really, sometimes they look at it and they giggle. Like one of them was like really bad body odor or somebody eating boogers in front of them. And they giggle. I'm like, no, really? Can you sit with that? Because yes, I have had people just dig at their nose and eat it right in front of me. And so, you have to be prepared to hear and see things and smell things and experience things. And you have to be aware if I can sit in a room with this. I have to be aware. And so it's really important that the therapist is very prepared and just stop calling yourself trauma informed. So anyway, without safety, the first stage of this model, again, if you try to reprocess the trauma too soon, the symptoms will get worse. Now, what I will say is when I go into reprocessing with all of my clients, the remembrance stage, I often tell them things are going to get worse before better, because essentially they've done everything they can, whatever that is, to avoid these memories, right? And so what I'm doing with the remembrance part of this process is I'm reopening it. So we're going to see a fluctuation in symptoms. But the thing is that we've spent a lot of time in safety to ensure that they've got the skills to move forward. I don't know why I have a frog in my throat today. I apologize. So what I want to talk about is that Herman explains that safety has two essential dimensions. So the first one is external safety. So this means that they're free from ongoing harm, coercive control, or dangerous environments. This is really, really key to have the external safety. Then the second dimension is internal safety, right? So this is the ability to have some sort of measure of control over their body and emotions within their immediate surroundings, which, it's interesting. We can usually get external safety, but the internal safety is what takes a really long time in this stage. And you definitely do not want to skip this. But both of these are absolutely required. So you can't do deep emotional work if you're still living with a perpetrator, or if your basic needs are unstable, or if your nervous system has no reliable anchor in the moment. You cannot go into deep emotional work. We see this a lot in domestic violence shelters. What they really do is they are focused on stage one. They have groups where they can do some processing, and they're very cautious with that processing within the group because they've just barely gotten the women external safety, but it takes a very long time for them to feel the internal safety, and oftentimes it takes years for this to happen. But both of those two dimensions are absolutely essential for you to even step into the deep reprocessing work. And so I think oftentimes clinicians, they think, well, they're coming into my counseling office, so obviously they have external safety. No, not necessarily. So you really do have to do a comprehensive assessment of, not only their physical needs, their environments, but also where they're at internally. And this is why, again, going back to what I've discussed, why I'm really pushing for the elevated standards of clinicians is the use of measurement-based care, because if you create a battery of assessments, you can really, let me finish my first thought. You can really start to assess those two dimensions pretty well. What I'll say is a lot of clinicians, I've heard a lot of people, gotten a lot of mail, anonymous, which is interesting, saying to me, well, you're re-traumatizing the person by doing the assessments. So what I want to say to them is they're already traumatized. They're already not getting the care they need. If I have a baseline assessment so I can see what's happening to their brain and their nervous system, and I can know about their basic needs being met, This gives me a baseline of where I need to go and what I need to provide as a clinician. If you're too afraid to do assessments on your client because you think you're going to re-traumatize them, then I really think that you shouldn't be in the field. I mean, if you are just constantly walking through this field on subjective, I think I'm doing a good job and I'm a good therapist, that's not good enough. It's just not. And that's why, unfortunately, so many people come to me after being with therapists for 2 years, 5 years, 7 years, or they've been through 14 different therapists and they haven't found any help because you've got the therapists that don't want to do measurement-based care because they say it re-traumatizes. I frankly think it's just laziness. But again, if you use a baseline of assessments, you can really see a lot of those internal and external dimensions, how they're being met. We talked about the ACE study before. That's going to be talking about their adverse childhood experiences. But one of the things that I've created within the Untangled Mind pathway in the level 1, they have a full checklist to go through. How is food, water, shelter? When was the last time they saw a doctor? What kind of medications are they on? Are they having any of these kind of issues, whether it's GI issues? I mean, it's a huge checklist of items. Because if I see that there's a lot that haven't been looked at, gosh, we need to refer you to a provider that I trust to make sure that we're hitting every single avenue to protect you and help you stabilize. That is the very first thing that I do with clients that come to me is level 1 is really, people kind of look at it like, this is like really basic. I thought we were going to go straight into trauma therapy. And I'm like, believe it or not, level 1 is foundational. It is trauma therapy. It's stage 1. My level 1, 2, 3, and a little bit of 4 are really safety of the triphasic model. I use education and I use those 4 levels to take a long time. There's got to be, I don't know, probably 20 assignments within those 4 levels because I want to ensure the safety and stability of the individual before I go into reprocessing. That's why it's built the way that it is. So Herman devotes an entire chapter in her trauma and recovery book to the stage, to safety, because it is that important. What I'll say with my clients is that, I do a battery of assessments, and based on the data that I have compiled over these years, I can determine how many sessions I think it's going to take for us to give them the tools they need. Now, if I see someone that has severe trauma, we are going to spend, I might say we're going to do over 24 sessions together because by law, I need to give them an idea of like how long, how much money. With that, when it's like a complex trauma history, so it's something that started way in childhood, it's going to be session after session after session. And most of it is safety. Oh, here's a personal story. So kind of personal. Client has been with me, I don't even know how many sessions now. But what was really interesting is that we sat in safety for a long time. And I knew some of the peripheral abuses that took place in this person's life, but I never pushed because it wasn't time. And I recognized just sitting in the room with this person that their nervous system was on high alert, like super high alert. They would sit in the corner of the couch. And I always tell everybody that comes into my office, like, kick off your shoes, wrap up in the blankie, let me get you something to drink. I want them to be very comfortable. And this individual would sit at the very far end of the couch, arms wrapped around self, not comfortable, that sort of thing. And so I recognized, okay, this is a nervous system that's constantly scanning for danger. And if I push too quickly, this person's never coming back. And that's the problem too, is therapists that push too quickly, those clients are not going to come back. And listen, I've done that too. I mean, we all kind of have to learn by doing it wrong. And so I've had that happen once, and it's the worst memory. I just hate it. But I had to learn. All that to be said, this individual has been with me, I don't know, maybe 8 sessions worth by now, I think. But what's really neat is that in the last 2 sessions, I've gotten hugs. And what I'll say is some clinicians are totally against hugs. I hug female clients. and a couple male clients that I've had for years, if they've had a particularly bad session, I'm like, do you need a hug? I don't have a problem with physical touch, obviously appropriate physical touch with clients, and it's not appropriate for every single client. But when I get a hug from someone that's coming to me for this deep, complex trauma work, when I get a hug, that's an indication to me of, okay, now they feel safe. Now we can begin to do some more work. And that's when I start kind of titrating remembrance. So titrating means we might go into a memory and come back up. We might go into a memory and then we come back out. And so we titrate that remembrance so that I can ensure that all of the methods I gave them during stage 1 are in effect. So Herman devotes an entire chapter to safety, and it's really neat when you do recognize that someone has reached it. It's really neat. So one of the passages that she wrote in the book said, without freedom, there can be no safety and no recovery. But freedom is often achieved at great cost. In order to gain their freedom, survivors may have to give up almost everything else. Rarely are the dimensions of this sacrifice fully recognized. So, survivors that are listening to this, I recognize when we start walking into so many of these aspects, dimensions of your life, that for you to achieve freedom, you have to give up so much. And what do you give up? Sometimes it's your physical environment. Sometimes it's leaving everything. And that is a scary thing in and of itself. Sometimes it's giving up those coping mechanisms, and that's really scary, and it's a really great cost. It might even be addictions. Like, how do I give up this addiction? Because if I give up this addiction that helps me not think about the trauma, then the trauma is like pummeling me all day long. Sometimes the cost is sitting there with me, and we've gone through remembrance and we're going into more cognitive strategies, and I'm constantly hammering away at you like, we've got to change this thought. We've got to change this thought. We got to change this thought. I recognize that there is a severe, severe cost to you to gain your freedom. And it's not just in those external environments, it's definitely internally. And, I do not think that clinicians consider how much they give up. It's not just in their time and resources with us. They have to give up so much to find recovery. There's this example in the book. It's not an extreme example, so it's okay for those of you listening. So it talked about this gal, I think she was a college student, and and she was living with her abusive father, and essentially she gave up everything. She had to kind of interrupt work. She had to interrupt college, I think she was in. She had to find a job. She had to find her own apartment. She had to negotiate her own lower therapy fees just to get the help. And so she gave up a lot. And it was all to create enough distance from her abusive father so that the actual therapy work could be done. Now, this is not, again, like I said, an extreme example, but it is the lived reality for countless survivors of childhood abuse, domestic violence, coercive control, or even cults. And so safety often demands that you're going to have to leave relationships, that you're changing or ending contact with family members. It might be relocating. It might be rebuilding financial independence. It might be grieving the loss of community, identity, or any hope of reconciliation. So I think that society frequently minimizes this cost in phrases like, well, just leave or just set boundaries. Another client said to me that's recently incoming. And again, and this is what I say to people, I do consultations before I take anyone on. I don't allow anybody just to schedule with me. I have to make sure they're a good fit because my system is very intense. And so I could actually cause you traumatic experiences if you came in and you're not a good fit. But all that to be said, one client said, the one that was with someone for 2 years, they said, well, just, you just have to breathe through this. And yeah, breath work is part of the regulation skills you're going to learn in safety, but the usage of our words matter. Words matter. My husband says that to me all the time. Words matter. So think very carefully about, well, just take a breath. It's going to be okay. I mean, that doesn't help anyone. I have another client, another one coming in, was doing some really great in-depth work, actually found an EMDR therapist. And the EMDR therapist, they had 6 sessions in, just left. So they're already in the EMDR sessions. The therapist apparently moved on and did not provide any referrals. By the way, anybody that's gone through that, you should file on them. You should turn them into your state board, because we, by our ethics and the laws, like in Georgia, we have to provide referral and we have to ensure that the individual is taken care of. But this therapist just up and ditched. Now, after talking to this individual about how this person did EMDR, they were just flitting around. They didn't know what they're doing. The client was like, no, they didn't take any data. Is there supposed to be data? I'm like, yes, there's supposed to be data. So again, I think that society really does minimize the cost. And unfortunately, a lot of therapists do this as well. So Herman calls us to recognize the full weight of these sacrifices that are being made for the individual that's sitting across from us and for someone you may know and love. So that grief that comes with them is part of that safety work itself. So you might see someone that's just really in the depths of grief. And I've heard some family members get really frustrated, like, why can't they just get over this? You don't get to determine when grief is done. Now, again, there's something called prolonged grief, complicated grief. But when we're talking about these trauma survivors, give it a breath. Give it a breath for them, because you're just going to continue to traumatize them if you're telling them that they're taking too long. Okay, so this is how we establish safety for a client. And again, individuals that are listening, if you have had a real difficult time finding someone that truly works trauma-informed. And here, again, I want to make this caveat. You might have had traumatic experiences. It doesn't mean it lives in your brain and your nervous system like trauma. Again, it's being used way, way, way too much. I had an individual call for a consultation last week. Definitely had a trauma history, but had a very rich history of actually very, very informed treatment. And the person said, yeah, I'm actually doing great. I'm just thinking I need to do like preventative. And I made sure to tell this person, like, I don't do aesthetic counseling. I don't do preventative counseling. And what I mean by aesthetic counseling is you don't come to me like you go to the gym. You don't come to me like you go get your weekly facial. I don't do that kind of counseling. I actually don't think that's counseling, believe it or not. And I just told this individual, you have a deep history of working through this, and you have no trauma symptomology right now, nothing, no hypervigilance, no nightmares, no, other maladaptive coping strategies. I am not going to introduce you into my model of counseling for trauma and reopen that. And I said to this person, I said, if you keep digging at trauma's going to start digging at you, meaning that as trauma therapists, we know we can't get rid of your trauma. It's what happened. It's part of your history. But if the clinician does this process effectively and we give the individual tools, that trauma doesn't live alive, if that makes sense. It doesn't live alive within your body and nervous system, which was absolutely this individual. This individual was looking at therapy as like an aesthetic of, well, this is self-care. And I said, no. And I explained to this person, I can't bring you on. That's unethical. I'll cause you harm. And I explained, you need to dig into that toolbox that you have. You need to build community. And that's part of this model too. And we'll talk about this for the third stage, is that reconnection comes when there's a resolve. And remember, there's a great cost for their freedom. So it kind of opens up a void. So part of the clinician's job is to encourage that autonomy and resilience in building community, getting involved, whether that's, maybe they go to AA, maybe they go to church and they join a group. Whatever it is, you've got to build that community, because that is so key for reconnection. And we know that with all the research that, connection with community is absolutely key to all of our resilient factors. Heck, we saw in 2020 during COVID how detrimental it was for us to be taken apart from each other. I mean, it broke the world. it broke our minds. It really did. And I think that's why we're in the mess that we are today, part of it. So all that to be said, trauma has got to also be assessed. So clinicians, if you're practicing as a generalist, okay, I would tell you that you should probably niche down and figure out what you're going to do. But if you have someone come in and say, I have trauma, you need to have a specific set of parameters that determine if this is trauma if you don't do assessments. And again, if you did measurement-based care, you could see this. I've had plenty of people come in and say, oh yeah, I've totally got trauma. They do all the assessments. Anxiety, there's nothing. Depression, there's nothing. Trauma, there's nothing. I look under every single rock and there's nothing. And I have to say to them, although this experience was traumatic, I am not seeing any evidence of traumatic symptomology, trauma symptomology, or even severe anxiety. That's why I do severe anxiety and trauma. And I have to tell them that, like, there's no indication. I had a woman a couple months ago, same thing. She was awesome, loved her. I thought I was going to bring her on. And I started doing the measurement-based care, or the measurements. And I was like, oh my gosh. And I called her. I said, listen, I'm not going to waste your time or money, nor am I going to cause you harm. This is what I wanted to tell you. You were kicking ass at life. This is what I told her. I said, you're kicking ass at life, considering she was coming to me for anxiety, considering the high levels of anxiety that you've experienced before, the different therapies that you've gone through. I can see that you have effective tools. I am not going to step into this aesthetic counseling with you because you're kicking butt. Just use the tools that you have. Okay. So all that to be said, I kind of got off on a tangent there. The practical hows of establishing safety. Here is what it is. So Herman emphasizes that the survivor has to be able to take charge of material circumstances of their life. So because this is empowering, even when it feels overwhelming. So take, for example, if a victim of a rape, she goes into the hospital, and yes, it could be a he too. She goes in the hospital. And what we know when there is a rape kit that needs to be done, they don't force that on to the rape victim. They give the rape victim all the autonomy over the circumstances of what's happening. Unclothing, using what instruments, they give them the control over that. And listen, sometimes that means the victim leaves. It does. But if we force power over them, that is then therefore re-traumatizing them. So it's no different than what we see when it comes to rape victims. We always give rape victims the say-so of what's next. So practical steps for safety. Number one, safety planning. So for some clients, this is really essential. So we're identifying safe people, places, and emergency strategies, okay? Number two is stabilizing basic needs, housing, food, medical care, and income, okay? And again, all of these are within the untangled mind pathway. My clients don't know that this is a triphasic model, but it is. And the next one is creating structure and predictability. This is huge. We need routines, we need boundaries, and we need environments that signal safety to that person's nervous system. I had a client this last week go couch shopping. I was so excited for them. And it was one of those things they said in session, like, I've never wanted to decorate my apartment before, but buying a couch was like, oh my gosh, I'm finding myself. And it was just so cool. They sent me pictures of the couch and everything. And it sounds silly, but when you grow up in an environment where you're constantly scanning for danger, decorating is one of those things that they don't do. They don't, because it's like, why would I do that? And so to buy a couch was that establishment of, this is safety for my nervous system, and now I can rest. Now I can do the decor. And then a really key one, really key one, and this is level 3 for Untangled Mind Pathway, is learning regulation tools. We can sit here a lot with my clients, and we bounce back and forth. So this is like grounding techniques, breathing techniques. sometimes some somatic movement, some sensory supports to help the body return to the present moment. So in my office, all my clients know when we go into some of our reprocessing or remembrance, I have warheads in a little box. And those warheads, they're sour as all get out and they're gross. But oftentimes I use them when I see that they have gone so deep into remembrance and they've forgotten the tools that we need, even if I remind them, that I have them suck on a warhead. So I teach my clients that suck on a warhead, suck on a lifesaver. I have lifesavers in the office too. I have a whole section on regulation tools in Untangled Mind Pathway. Another client said we had hopped kind of around in the book or whatever, and she'd gotten to that level. She's like, well, shoot, this would have been helpful last week because we had done some other stuff and we just giggled about it. But the regulation tools, these are really, really key. And during this safety phase, you have to build the therapeutic alliance. This is something that therapists hear all the time in training. Therapeutic alliance, therapeutic alliance. Basically, it's a relationship with the person that you're giving care to. But the relationship with the care worker, the therapist, is the most important relationship. It really is, because for survivors to come into a stranger and try to test, just trust you right off the bat, if you go right into trauma processing, my gosh, you are wreaking havoc on that person's mind and body. So that therapeutic alliance is huge. So that could be that you spend the first 6 sessions just hanging out, talking. It might be like one client, we talked about music tastes. One client, we talked about different business ventures. Like, you have to kind of sit in safety. And as a clinician, you really do have to be adept at watching the body signals within the counseling room. It's not just what they say, because oftentimes they want to perform. Oftentimes survivors want to perform for you because that's what they've had to do to make it through life. And so they'll be like, yeah, I got this. A lot of my cops do that. No, let's just get into the trauma processing, Piper. I'm like, hold on, just a second. Like, let's take some time. So the trauma clinician really does need to be aware that alliance, that relationship, is 100% key, as well as all of those different tools, and as well as assessing all of those basic needs, safe places, food, water, shelter, medical care, all of that. Okay. So again, for survivors, stage 1 is really about reclaiming their agency, one very small decision at a time. And so for clinicians, it means that you have to be so patient, supporting the survivor in like super practical tasks instead of rushing to explore the trauma story. And it was interesting when I was talking to Dr. Page that I've mentioned before. She and I were talking about this, and she said to me, Piper, can you park it in stage 1? Can you provide that care in stage 1? And my question to her was, yes, absolutely. I 100% believe in stage 1. The only thing is that we have to be aware of as clinicians too, that you have to be aware if you're creating a dependence on stage 1 so that they can avoid stage 2. Does that make sense? So if you're constantly just building therapeutic alliance and having, run of the, weekly events instead of really talking about the stuff they came for, you can build a dependence on you, and they're not actually getting the work that they need in stage 2. And again, I talked about that before. It's often because clinicians don't know how to bring up the bad stuff. They don't want to. They don't want to hurt the person, or they just don't think that they can handle it. They can hear it. So you do have to be aware of that, is like kind of what are the bounds? What are you seeing if the person is really refusing stage 2 and they've been with you for a year, let's just say a year, I don't know. But you're seeing some other like kind of dependency things that are happening. You have to have that very upfront conversation with the client about, you said you wanted the trauma work. We have to step into this. I'm not serving you. I'm causing you more harm. And it might be that you end the relationship until they're ready. Obviously, don't just end it, but you just suggest to them, hey, you need to come back to me when you're ready to do this stuff. Okay. Okay. So, some really common, we've talked about this, and damaging mistakes that I do see in the field, and I've seen it repeatedly, is, like I said, I see clinicians or coaches say they're trauma informed, yet beginning deep trauma processing or memory work, they do all this before even safety is established, which is crazy. So it's like jumping straight into EMDR or prolonged exposure. And again, EMDR, y'all, eye movement desensitization reprocessing, it's just an exposure tool. And what I'll say about exposure, people don't really understand the premise behind exposure. So I have a short story that I wrote in the book. I have short stories in there. Sorry, clients that read the book. It's called The Bike. And so essentially, it's like when I was writing the story, I remembered my sons. And so when we're teaching them to ride the bike, inevitably they're going to crash and burn. So what happens is after they're crashed on the bike, they're all skinned up, they're upset, we're kissing boo-boos, we're doing all that. But then my boys were scared to death of the bike because the bike was the danger, right? And so what we did, my husband and I, is we had to titrate exposure to the bike. So that's like the boys would look at the bike, and then one day we might have the boys straddle the bike, and then it might be that daddy or mommy holds the bike seat and they like let one leg off the ground. Maybe then they start paddling, but we still have to keep our hand on the bike seat or on their back. And then before they're like, let go of the bike, and they're flying down the road again. That's all exposure therapy is we're exposing the brain to the feared stimulus, in this case, the bike, so that the brain no longer says bike equals bear, right? So we're exposing to the brain to the feared stimulus so that the brain no longer reacts to the feared stimulus as if it is still happening, as if a bear is still chasing them. That's what we do. So we see this a lot of times with clinicians. They jump straight into EMDR and prolonged exposure, or these like really detailed trauma narratives in the very first couple sessions. And again, you have to be able to assess if the client is actually creating a really deep rapport with you, or if this is performative because this is what they've had to do to survive. You have to be able to see the difference. The second thing I see a lot about or hear a lot about is they encourage clients to feel everything. Just feel it all without building those resources or external stability. So my clients have the toolbox that they're going to pull from. All of my regulation strategies, it's not for everybody. It's not. I had one client a couple years ago. She loved humming. That's how she managed her trauma, because humming helps vagal activation. It's the whole thing. Other clients have other things. They like grounding. They like going outside and going for a brisk walk. I have some clients that they really like the cold water exposure. Everybody has their thing that works the best for their system. But a lot of these clinicians just charge them right in without building those resources, which is really scary. Or here's the other thing. A lot of times I hear clinicians minimizing the survivor's current life circumstances with clients or with comments like, well, the past is the past and you're safe now. Now, when my clients are in the remembrance stage, I will remind them when they're narrating their trauma, I'll say, you're safe, you're here with me. If you need to do some grounding, I want you to feel the couch under your fingertips. I want you to, feel that napkin or that Kleenex in your hand. So we do have to remember them or help them remember that where they are in the moment of remembrance. But I have heard way too many stories of clinicians minimizing these people, being like, okay, well, the past is in the past. You're safe now. Like, you've got an apartment. You're away from the man that beat you up for the last 20 years. They really minimize it, which is so deeply traumatic. And Herman calls these like the most arduous therapeutic errors, and that's bypassing those essential tasks of safety. You can't do these things. So when that happens, the client will always feel more dysregulated, or they'll drop out of therapy, or they'll experience an increase in symptoms. Now, I always tell my clients when we have processing, I have a worksheet I hand them. It's called the post-processing dump. And basically, you feel awful because when you go into a reprocessing session, essentially I'm exposing the brain right to the bear, and it's like being chased by a bear for an hour. So you can imagine all of those neurotransmitters, cortisol, adrenaline, and everything's going wackadoo in the body. And so they're going to feel pretty lousy up to 48 hours. And we also have to remind them that that post-trauma processing dump that you're going to feel, it's really key to take care of yourself in that time. Plenty of sleep, plenty of good protein, plenty of good food, plenty of water, no substances at all, because part of the reason that that person's really exhausted after a remembrance session is because it's hard work building new neural pathways. They're building new brain. So if you're a clinician that's listening, I really, really, really invite you to pause and reflect. Are you truly, truly, truly assessing and strengthening that safety before moving forward? One of the things Dr. Page said to me is like, how do you know? We just talked about like, how do you know when it's time to move forward? And I explained, well, I'm watching their nervous system, not just their words. I'm watching our relationship. And she recognized that I understood what titration was. And so clinicians, you have to really be assessing the whole person before you move into anything else. Safety is absolutely key. Or are you, even with best intentions, rushing in because it feels more productive? Listen, I've done the same exact thing. I've done the same exact thing where I'm like, yes, I see them. They're right there. They're right there. And I pushed too fast into remembrance and then they dropped out. I've talked about that one client a couple years ago. And it still to this day breaks my heart. I just went too fast. And it was really out of me holding hope for this person. I was like, oh my gosh, they're there. This is great. They're trusting me. And I went too fast. That was on me. And so it was about me feeling productive for that person. That's not what this is about. And what I also want to say is a triphasic model of trauma care is not strictly linear. It's really, really important to understand that it's not a straight line. Herman and any other trauma expert, we all know that the survivors often need to return to the safety stage over and over and over again, especially when there's like new life stressors or when old memories might resurface more intensely or when certain life circumstances might shift. Safety, the triphasic model, you're kind of ebbing and flowing when you're going through it. When you work with complex trauma survivors, so complex trauma typically is when trauma begins in childhood. What is really interesting is what she said in her book is that oftentimes the individual that comes to you, they go through safety, you build the rapport, that's great. You go into remembrance, they go into the reconnection, and what's really hard for them through the third stage is they feel very immature. You hear this word a lot, immature. And it's because the traumatic experience stole away the normal adolescence that they would have had, that awkward adolescence that they would have to go through due to the traumatic experiences. So you might have an adult sitting across from you that's experiencing this reconnection stage, and they're like this, I feel like an idiot. I feel like I'm a 12-year-old. Well, yeah, really, truly, your brain is processing something because your adolescence was stolen from you. So you're actually going through this really awkward stage in the adult years. And so often when we see this, we hop back to safety. So again, it's titrating all of these different experiences. And again, through the whole thing, clinicians, we are reminding the client that it took this many years of your brain to survive with this trauma. It's going to take much more reps for us to build a new brain. You have to educate them on neuroplasticity. You have to really educate them on what those trauma networks look like in the brain and how we're kind of breaking them open. And I always tell them, I said, our work is making that trauma network, those neural clusters in your brain, kind of like a colander, so we can bridge out and build new opportunities going to the more positive networks. But it's a long process. This is not a very fast process at all. So again, it's very important for clinicians to understand it is not a linear model ever, and we will always go back to safety. Always, always, always. Safety is never a one and done stage. Never. It is home base that you return to throughout the entire healing process. This is absolutely normal, and it is absolutely wise, and it is not a sign of failure. So again, like I had said, that part in Herman's book talking about the cost of freedom, it really has been sitting with me, that the recognizing that freedom can require giving up so much, almost everything else, helped me understand why so many survivors feel stuck and overwhelmed and exhausted, because they're trying so hard. But if those listening that maybe you have a loved one, a family member, a friend, whatever it is, step out. step out and understand the great cost. You might be like, well, like a gal, this was a story I heard of, it wasn't my client, was raped in college, and she went home and she was safe at home. And her mother and father were so like, why can't she just get out of it? We're not like, and they were patient in the beginning, but they couldn't understand she's in a safe environment. Why? What is going on? Well, it's like the cost of her freedom from this rape is not just being able to go home. Going home took away the very freedom that she was really living and loving in college. So she got rid of one of the freedoms, had to go home and lose another freedom. Does that make sense? So for survivors, the cost of freedom is extraordinarily great. And if you're in survivors, if you're listening to this, if you're feeling really stuck or exhausted and you're in that place right now, the feelings that you're feeling are absolutely valid. The cost is so, so, so real. And I recognize that. And it takes a lot of courage to continue to move towards safety. And so it's just really key, clinicians, family members, friends, that you understand the cost. It is not what you see. It's not about you. That's the other thing. It is not about you. And clinicians, it is not about you. Do not push past safety stage 1 until you are absolutely sure. So safety is the beginning of freedom. It is a phase that makes every other later phase possible in the triphasic model. It is so, so key to the healing and recovery of our clients. So next episode, we're going to move into stage 2, and this is remembrance and mourning. So this is the reprocessing of the trauma. So this is the very, very, very careful work of reconstructing sort of the trauma story with someone like myself. A compassionate witness is what we talk about it. So for today, here is a question that I would love to provide you to sit with, or even maybe journal. What would it look like, or what would you be feeling even if you were even a little bit safer today for you right now? So what is one small doable step towards safety that feels possible in the coming days? You don't have to have everything figured out all at once. You really don't. One safe step matters more than you'll know. And please, 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 survivors, if you haven't found a trauma therapist, continue to do your digging, educate yourself on the triphasic model. You can interview therapists and ask them, well, what model do you use? If they have no idea what you're talking about, and they say, well, I use, my model is EMDR. EMDR is a tool. It's an exposure tool. That's what EMDR is. So educate yourself on the untangledmind.net website under resources. I actually have a whole page dedicated to helping you find the best therapist for you. I have a worksheet that you can download, and it gives you questions that you can ask. It's really, really important that you get the care that you need. Because again, if you don't have this stage 1, you're going to be re-traumatized by someone. And therapists, listen, or coaches, stop using trauma like it's just some buzzword. You are insulting survivors. You really are, if you don't know what you're doing. And you're insulting those of us clinicians that take this sacred work so very seriously. So again, thank you for listening today to the Untangled Mind podcast. Your safety matters, your healing matters, and there is real hope. There really is in the triphasic model. You can hold one safe step at a time. See you next for stage 2. That brings us to the end of this episode. Thanks for joining me. I hope you learned some tools that can equip you to untangle your mind and untangle your life. If you're curious about working with me for your anxiety or trauma, head on over to my website at untangledmind.net to connect with me. If you enjoyed the show, please rate and review me on your podcast listening platform and share it with your friends and family. As always, thanks so much for listening to me, Piper Harris, with the Untangled Mind podcast. I'll talk with you next time.